Before we begin, if you're a fan of stories about ordinary people who become extraordinary heroes, make sure to subscribe. Now, let's dive into the story of a man who held the fate of hundreds in his hands. The date was October 27, 1978. On a dimly lit control board, the tiny lights, representing the massive passenger trains, were hurtling towards each other on the same track. Miles apart yet separated by only minutes, they were on a collision course. In a quiet, windowless room sat one man, Alastair Finch. For him, this wasn't just another shift. It was the moment that would define his life and the lives of over 800 unsuspecting passengers. What would you do if the world held its breath, waiting for your next move? Alastair Finch was not born a hero. He was born in 1938 in the small, unassuming town of Crestline, Ohio. A place where the rhythm of life was dictated by the rumble of passing trains. His father was a track maintenance worker, and from a young age, Alastair's world was steeped in the scent of steel and diesel. He wasn't a particularly remarkable student, often finding his mind drifting from textbooks to the intricate web of tracks that crisscrossed his hometown. He didn't dream of fame or fortune. He dreamt of being a part of that great iron network, the backbone of the nation's transport. After high school, following in his father's footsteps seemed inevitable. He started as a yard worker, his days filled with the clang of coupling cars and the shouts of fellow railroad men. It was hard, physical labor, but it taught him the language of the railroad from the ground up. He learned how a switch felt when it locked into place, the specific groan a freight car makes under a heavy load, and the subtle signs of a track under stress. These weren't lessons taught in a classroom. They were absorbed through calloused hands and a watchful eye. It was during these years that he met Clara, a local librarian who saw past the grease on his hands and into the quiet determination in his eyes. They married in 1961, and soon, their small home was filled with the sounds of two young children. With a growing family, Alastair knew he needed a more stable, less physically demanding role. He set his sights on the dispatch office. The job was a world away from the grit of the rail yard. It was a world of schedules, timetables, and immense, unseen responsibility. He spent years studying, poring over manuals, and shadowing senior dispatchers. The control board, with its labyrinth of lights and switches, was daunting. Each light was a train, each switch a decision, and every decision carried weight. In 1972, he finally earned his dispatcher's chair. His colleagues knew him as quiet, meticulous, and unflappable. He was the kind of man you'd barely notice, but the one you'd trust implicitly. For 6 years, his shifts passed in a steady, predictable rhythm. Trains left on time, they arrived on time. It was a job where success was measured in silence and uneventfulness. But the night of October 27, 1978, shattered that silence. A fierce autumn storm was raging across the Midwest. Heavy rain and high winds were wreaking havoc, causing signal malfunctions and communication breakdowns along the line. Alastair was juggling a dozen delays, rerouting freight to clear paths for passenger trains running hours behind schedule. It was controlled chaos, the kind of night that tests the mettle of even the most seasoned dispatcher. Around 11:40 p.m., a call came through from a signal maintainer. A critical switch junction, miles out in the storm-swept darkness, was frozen. It was stuck, locking the westbound track open. Standard procedure was to halt all traffic in the sector, but as Alastair's eyes scanned the board, a cold dread washed over him. The Starlight Express, carrying 450 passengers, had just passed the last signal before the faulty switch. It was already in the block, out of communication and committed to its path. At the same time, coming from the opposite direction on that very same track, was the Midnight Limited, with nearly 400 souls aboard. Due to a communication lag from the storm, its position hadn't updated for several crucial minutes. When the light finally blinked into its true position, the reality was horrifying. They were on the same track, heading for a head-on collision at a combined speed of over 120 miles per hour. But in that moment, Alastair remained calm. His years of experience, his intimate knowledge of every siding and spur, took over. He had no time to radio the trains. They were in a dead zone. He couldn't fix the frozen switch miles away. He scanned the control board, a map he knew better than his own reflection. There was one chance. A small, rarely used maintenance siding, designated Siding 7B, was located just over a mile ahead of the Starlight Express. It was a short, dead-end track just long enough to hold a few maintenance cars. It was never meant for a full passenger train. The switch to Siding 7B was manual, but it was controlled from his board. He had less than 90 seconds before the Starlight Express would pass it, but diverting a high-speed passenger train onto a short, dead-end siding was an enormous risk. The braking distance, the integrity of the old track, the sharp curve of the turnout, everything screamed disaster. The train could derail, jackknife, or simply overshoot the siding and plow into the earth. The alternative, however, was certain catastrophe. With a steady hand, Alistair reached for the control. He flipped the switch for Siding 7B. A small light on his board turned from green to red, confirming the track had been thrown. Now, all he could do was wait. The next 2 minutes stretched into an eternity. In the silent control room, the only sound was the hum of the electronics and the frantic beating of his own heart. He waited, the violent lurch as the engineer on the Starlight Express saw the unexpected signal change and slammed on the emergency brakes. He envisioned the terror in the passenger cars. He had made a decision for another. Then, a crackle on the radio. A shaky voice, breathless and filled with disbelief. It was the engineer of the Starlight Express. "Control, this is Starlight. What in God's name was that? We've been diverted to Siding 7B. We stopped with feet to spare. We saw the Midnight Limited roar past on the main line. Control, do you copy?" Alistair leaned into his microphone, the tension finally releasing from his shoulders. "I copy, Starlight," he said, his own voice raspy with emotion. "Stay put. Everything is all right." He had done it. The Starlight Express came to a screeching halt just 10 feet from the end of the siding. A moment later, the Midnight Limited thundered past on the track where the Starlight should have been. The passengers on both trains, shaken but safe, would never fully comprehend how close they had come to tragedy. Alistair Finch finished his shift, filed his report, and drove home through the retreating storm as the sun began to rise. He walked in, kissed his sleeping wife, and sat at the kitchen table, watching the dawn break. A quiet man who had just saved 824 lives. Alistair never sought recognition. The incident was logged, investigated, and ultimately filed away as a testament to a well-functioning system and a competent employee. He continued his work as a dispatcher for another 15 years, his quiet diligence unwavering. He retired in 1993, returning to his simple life with Clara, tending his garden and playing with his grandchildren. He passed away peacefully in 2005. His obituary mentioned his long career with the railroad, but it didn't mention the night of October 27, 1978. It was a story known only to a handful of railroad insiders. Alistair Finch's legacy isn't written in headlines or history books. It's written in the lives of the 824 people who went home to their families that night. It's in the generations that follow, the children and grandchildren who exist, because of a decision made in a split second by a calm, focused man in a quiet room. His story is a powerful reminder that heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet competence, the dedication to one's craft, and the grace under pressure that makes all the difference. It's about the unseen guardians who keep our world turning, safely and silently. What part of Alistair's story resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of quiet heroes, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that deserve to be told. Thanks for watching.